You know, when we normally look at how human beings navigate life, we kind of rely pretty heavily on a sense of structural precision.
We do, yeah.
Like we like to think of our societal rules or our medical diagnostics and even our personal moral compasses
Hmm.
as operating almost like civil engineering.
Right, like building a bridge.
Exactly. You build a bridge according to the laws of physics and, it holds up the cars.
Mm.
Or you break a bone, the x-ray shows a clear, jagged line, and the doctor fixes it. It's binary. It's comforting, right?
It is. I mean, it's the appeal of the observable. We have this innate preference for things that can be neatly categorized, codified, and just placed into a predictable framework.
We want a spreadsheet for survival,
Like,
basically.
we really do. We absolutely want a spreadsheet.
But then you step into the actual lived experience of the human mind, especially when we're dealing with things like neurodevelopment, intuition, or, the invisible weight of systemic trauma.
And suddenly that metaphorical X-ray machine just shatters.
Right. We find ourselves trying to navigate this landscape that just isn't cleanly engineered at all. It's wildly complex, it's often contradictory, and it is deeply, deeply obscured by noise.
Yeah, it is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. And while that ambiguity is precisely where most of our modern suffering takes root.
Which is exactly why we are plunging into this specific deep dive today. Because we have to ask a terrifying, but honestly vital question.
And it is a big one.
It is. What happens when the very tools we've been conditioned to use to navigate our lives, our rigid adherence to societal rules, our unquestioning deference to authority, the entire legal and behavioral frameworks we consider normal, what if those are actually the very things generating our psychological and physical illness?
That is the core of it, yes.
So welcome to you, our listener, for joining us on this profound journey into the architecture of the human mind. Today we are taking apart the concept of free will. We're exploring the deeply physiological language of intuition and examining the immutable laws that actually govern our universe.
It's a massive mission we have in front of us today. We are really going to explore how mastering our own internal intuition might actually serve as the critical key to connecting with these laws of the universe.
Yeah, and perhaps more controversially, we'll look at how doing so fundamentally challenges the law of the land.
Right, meaning the variable, often flawed rules created by human leaders, human kings, politicians, that sort of thing.
And the ultimate promise here is just staggering. We're looking at a theoretical blueprint for a world entirely without fear, without systemic disparity, and honestly, without war.
It sounds utopian, but the frameworks we're looking at break it down mechanically.
They really do. And to construct this blueprint, we are synthesizing a really dense, fascinating stack of sources for you today. We're drawing heavily from Dr. Srivatsa's framework surrounding Maya meditation and mindset transformation.
Which is a fantastic foundational text for this.
Definitely. And we're bridging that with complex philosophical treatises on Earth jurisprudence and the ancient, deeply nuanced concept of dharma. We've also got some really rigorous legal and scientific perspectives on the debate around free will versus physical determinism.
Right, including how medical frameworks like the NICE guidelines and the Bolam test actually operate in our courtrooms.
Which we will absolutely unpack. Plus, we're bringing in foundational texts detailing the 12 universal laws and the foundation for consciousness development.
It is a remarkable convergence of disciplines. I mean, we're talking law, quantum biology, ancient philosophy, and somatic psychology all coming together.
Yeah, it's a lot. And just to set the stage properly for you listening, we are pulling from some highly provocative ideas today. Many of these frameworks fundamentally challenge modern medical hierarchies, long-standing political structures, and the very concept of human authority.
They do push a lot of boundaries.
Exactly. So as a heads up, our job as your guides isn't to endorse these specific political or social viewpoints. We aren't telling you to abandon your local laws or anything like that. We are here to impartially report on the architecture of these arguments.
We want to unpack the mechanisms of these philosophies, see what makes them tick, and offer you the clarity to just evaluate them for yourself.
Perfectly framed.
Yeah.
We're just the tour guides to the architecture of these ideas. Okay, so let's unpack this. Before we can even begin to talk about somehow connecting to the broader universe or achieving systemic peace, we have to understand the baseline of where we are right now.
And where we are, according to Dr. Srivatsa's framework, is in the middle of a profound disconnection. He diagnoses modern humanity as experiencing a silent crisis.
A silent crisis, which is, I don't know, it feels like an oxymoron almost.
It does, but it's a very apt term because The crisis doesn't look like a classic catastrophe on the surface. If you look at the metrics we normally use to judge human progress, we appear hyperconnected.
Right, we have smartphones, instant global communication, access to basically all human data.
Exactly. Incredibly complex social networks. Yet, the psychological baseline for a massive portion of the population is characterized by this profound sense of being lost.
Yeah, just totally untethered.
We are seeing epidemic levels of generalized anxiety, chronic burnout, the disintegration of relationships, and this relentless, exhausting search for meaning. That is our modern baseline right now.
And what I find so fascinating about Travas's approach, especially given his extensive background in high-pressure medical environments like operating theaters, is his assertion that this suffering does not mean the human machine is broken.
Yes, that is a huge point.
Because we are so quick to pathologize ourselves,
Right.
right? To say, oh, my brain chemistry is wrong, or I am fundamentally flawed. But this framework suggests we aren't broken at all. We are simply interference blocked.
That distinction changes absolutely everything. I mean, if you are broken, you require an external savior, a mechanic, a surgeon, a pill to fix you.
You're dependent on the outside.
Exactly. But if you are merely experiencing interference, you just require a method to tune the dial. The premise here is that human beings have been systematically conditioned to point their antennas outward.
So we're constantly chasing external validation to tell us who we are and what we are worth.
Right. We seek identity in our job titles, safety in our bank accounts, and even our biological healing through complete submission to medical authorities.
But the heart or the soul, that core of internal consciousness, never required chasing, did it?
No, it just required listening. We have simply accumulated too much static from the outside world.
And the loudest, most pervasive source of that static is a concept identified in the materials as the authority trap.
Ah, the authority trap. This is where it gets really interesting.
It does, because the authority trap is built on a deeply ingrained, almost universally accepted societal myth. And the myth is simply this: if you follow the rules, you will be safe.
It is the ultimate conditional promise of modern civilization, and it starts the moment we are born, basically.
Oh, totally. Study hard, get the respectable job, save your money, trust the established system.
Obey the designated leader, behave according to the accepted moral code, and you will avoid punishment. You will be insulated from chaos.
But the reality, as we all eventually discover, is that safety cannot be outsourced like that.
It really can't.
Following the rules without any internal compass is precisely how millions of people end up 20 years into careers that are completely eroding their nervous systems. Or they're trapped in marriages that look perfect on paper but are slowly suffocating them in reality.
Because we've equated obedience with wisdom, and they are not the same thing at all.
Not even close. So to understand exactly why this trap is so pervasive and so damaging, we have to explore the profound distinction the sources draw between human law, what we can call the law of the land, and universal law.
Right, and if we examine the principles of earth jurisprudence alongside the ancient Indian concept of dharma, a very stark contrast emerges.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, human laws are inherently variable. They are repealable. They are drafted by flawed individuals reacting to specific historical moments. Essentially, they are mechanisms of population management.
And historically, human laws have very frequently been designed to embed disparity, right? Like to protect the resources of the elite and demand submission from the vulnerable.
Exactly. There is a brilliant conceptual framing from the Rajneesh philosophy in our stack that perfectly illustrates this. It proposes that truth, in its absolute form, cannot be invented. It can only be discovered.
Oh, I love that. Gravity wasn't invented, the speed of light wasn't drafted in a committee.
They were discovered. The philosophy provocatively claims that anything a human being invents is, relative to the cosmos, essentially a fiction. It's a lie compared to a discovered immutable law.
And Earth jurisprudence builds perfectly on that foundation, doesn't it? It flips our standard legal hierarchy completely upside down.
It really does. It argues that the universe itself is the primary lawgiver, not human parliaments or congresses. Earth jurisprudence posits that human laws which violate the great jurisprudence, the fundamental ecological and energetic principles of the universe, are fundamentally illegitimate.
Because our current legal systems operate on the premise of, by the people, for the people, often to the detriment of everything else in the ecosystem.
Right, whereas Earth jurisprudence proposes a paradigm that is by the Earth community, for the Earth community.
So if human laws are basically just temporary, highly flawed fictions designed to manage us, Why do we surrender to them so completely?
Yeah.
Why does this authority trap exert such a gravitational pull on our psychology?
Because the trap is perfectly engineered to exploit three primal human fears.
Okay, let's dig into those. What's the first one?
The first is the fear of being wrong. Human beings are deeply, deeply uncomfortable with uncertainty. So we outsource our risk to experts.
Right, if an authority figure like a doctor or a financial advisor or a politician tells you what to do and the outcome is a disaster, your ego is protected.
Exactly. You can say, well, I followed the protocol. It's not my fault. We trade our autonomy for a scapegoat.
It's a liability shield for the ego. We'd rather be safely wrong with the crowd than risk being wrong on our own.
That's exactly it. Now, the second vulnerability is the fear of rejection. As a social species, isolation historically meant death, literally.
Yeah, if you were kicked out of the tribe, you starved.
Right. And today, that translates into seeking false belonging through strict conformity. We are terrified that if we actually honor our internal truth, if we say no to the family expectation or reject the cultural norm, we will make our tribe uncomfortable and they will cast us out.
The idea of false belonging is so insidious, actually. You mold yourself to fit a container that isn't yours, so the group accepts a version of you that doesn't actually exist.
You're accepted, but you're entirely unseen.
Which is why false belonging often feels far more isolating than actual solitude.
Completely. And finally, the third vulnerability is the fear of losing identity. We wrap our entire sense of self in these external structures.
Like, I am my job title.
Yes.
I am my political affiliation.
Right. And if we question the authority of those structures, we experience a terrifying identity crisis. Who am I if the rules I've built my life around are basically arbitrary?
Okay, I have to push back here for a second because this is where the philosophy meets the pavement. If human laws are just fictions and we're supposed to dismantle our blind obedience to them, isn't there a massive risk of total societal collapse?
Well, that's the obvious fear, isn't it?
Right. If everyone just decides to ignore the rules because they feel like it, don't we just get anarchy? It feels a bit like realizing that the map you're using was drawn by a stranger who might have been lost themselves. So you decide to throw the map out the window and drive blind. But if we all drive blind, we just crash into each other. You still need traffic lights.
Yeah. It's a crucial question, and it's one where these frameworks require deep nuance. The concept of honoring your soul or your inner intuition does not demand that you unilaterally rebel against all external authority.
Okay.
It demands that you develop the capacity to discern which authority actually aligns with truth in any given moment. Sometimes the authority you absolutely need to listen to is a surgeon or a civil engineer or a traffic light.
So the core problem identified here isn't the mere existence of external rules.
No, the problem is the blind, unquestioning, reflexive surrender of your internal autonomy to those rules.
Okay. So it's about retaking the steering wheel. You might still choose to look at the map drawn by someone else, and you might still choose to stop at the red light, but you are consciously making the choice to do so because it aligns with your survival and reality, not just because you are cowering in fear of a punishment.
Precisely. It is about the integration of rationality and external data with internal intuitive processing. You observe the environment. What does the data say? What does the law dictate? And then you check internally. What is the resonance in my physical body?
The healthiest decisions arise from the synthesis of both, governed ultimately by the sovereign choice of the individual.
Exactly.
So how do we actually do that? I mean, if we are bombarded by all this interference, the media, the societal expectations, our own ingrained fears, how do we tune out the noise of the authority trap and actually hear that internal GPS?
This brings us to the actual mechanics of Dr. Servatz's Maya meditation.
And I think it's important to clarify what this is because most of our listeners are highly familiar with standard mindfulness protocols. We know about breath work, we know about Vipassana, we know about cognitive behavioral reframing.
Right, but Maya meditation is a bit different.
It seems to strip away all the esoteric spiritualized framing and reduces meditation to a purely somatic diagnostic tool. Like it works for atheists and believers alike.
It really does. It removes the necessity for a specific belief system. It operates on the premise of radical honesty and stillness. The objective isn't to float away into an ethereal plane or to forcefully manifest a positive outcome.
So no toxic positivity here.
None at all. The goal is to deliberately shift the center of your identity away from the chaotic, conditioned mind and root it firmly in what the framework calls the soul, which functions as the steady, eternal observer.
The observer mechanic is brilliant, actually. It's the realization that if you can close your eyes and actively watch your thoughts racing, by,
Yeah.
worrying about an email, stressing about a relationship, then a fundamental division exists.
Yes, there are the thoughts, and there is the entity observing the thoughts.
Because you are the awareness watching the chaos, you cannot fundamentally be the chaos.
That cognitive uncoupling is paramount. You are not your fleeting emotional spikes, you are not your conditioned anxieties, and you are not the societal labels attached to your physical form. You are the consciousness experiencing them.
Wow. And once you anchor into that observer state, the practice itself becomes an exercise in highly targeted inquiry. Right.
Yes. The mechanism is incredibly straightforward. You sit in stillness, you center yourself physically, often just by placing a hand over your heart or your stomach to bring your focus back into your somatic reality.
Getting back into the body.
Exactly. And then instead of trying to empty your mind, you ask a highly specific, unflinchingly honest question, like, what is the truth about my career? What do I actually need to do about this medical diagnosis? Is this relationship healthy for me? And then you wait.
And this is where we reach what might be the most critical psychological distinction in the entire framework, because once you ask that question, an answer will come.
It will.
But how do you determine the origin of that answer? Is it the deep truth of your intuition? Or is it just the conditioned anxiety of your ego parroting back the authority trap?
Right, and the methodology categorizes this as distinguishing between the first whisper and the echo of the ego.
This timing dynamic is fascinating. Let's really break down the mechanics of this whisper versus the echo, because I think this is huge.
It really comes down to the speed and the quality of the signal. The soul, or the pure intuitive observer, always speaks first. It's the whisper.
Okay, so it's fast.
It operates entirely pre-rationally. It is instantaneous. It is emotionally neutral. It is incredibly clear. And it is almost always painfully simple.
Painfully simple, yeah.
Let's say you ask about a business partnership that looks incredibly lucrative on paper but has been keeping you awake at night. You sit, you ask the question, and the very first split-second sensation or thought is simply, this is unsafe, walk away.
It doesn't give you a PowerPoint presentation. It just gives you the absolute bottom line.
Exactly. But then, nanoseconds later, the defense mechanisms kick in.
That is the echo. The ego speaks second.
Yes. The ego is loud, it is deeply defensive, it is entirely rooted in fear, and it requires massive amounts of complex justification to sustain itself.
So immediately after that quiet whisper tells you to walk away, the ego erupts. Like, but what about the money? You signed a contract. What will your industry peers think of you? If you walk away now, you'll be a failure.
So the soul delivers the raw data of truth. And the ego immediately generates an itemized, panic-driven list of reasons why acting on that truth is too dangerous.
It's like the soul requires absolutely no external confirmation to exist, whereas the ego is essentially a fragile construct that constantly needs to argue for its own survival.
Precisely. Now, to a skeptic, this might just sound like abstract, poetic phrasing, whispers and egos, but the source materials dive deeply into the biophysics of what is actually happening here.
Which I love because it grounds it in reality.
Exactly. They frame intuition not as magic, but as a quantifiable biological and energetic reality. We can look at the rational analytical mind as a sequential processor, much like a standard computer.
Right. It calculates based on historical data, societal rules, and language.
It is incredibly useful, but it is relatively slow. Intuition, on the other hand, is described as operating akin to quantum processing.
Which means it's not bound by linear thought. It's instantly absorbing and synthesizing massive data sets that the conscious prefrontal cortex doesn't even register.
Yes. The human nervous system is an incredibly sophisticated antenna. It is constantly picking up on subtle environmental cues, micro-expressions, shifts in pheromones, and the electromagnetic fields generated by the cardiac and neural activity of other people.
It's absorbing everything all at once.
Right. The intuitive whisper is the holistic output of that massive subconscious data processing.
It kind of reminds me of the classic examples of sudden, inexplicable knowing, like the parent who wakes up from a dead sleep seconds before their child falls out of bed in the next room.
Or the seasoned detective who walks into a room where everything looks perfectly normal, but their body screams that something is catastrophically wrong.
Exactly. The rational mind is looking at the furniture and seeing nothing out of place. The intuitive mind is processing 1,000 subtle anomalies simultaneously and delivering a unified threat assessment.
That's a perfect example. The text argues that every thought and emotion creates a distinct energetic field, and our somatic systems are designed to interact with those fields. But this brings up a very practical problem for the practitioner.
Okay, what's the problem?
The cognitive mind is very good at disguising itself. If you sit down and ask a question, how do you know for absolute certain that you aren't just feeling the physical manifestation of your own neuroses?
Right. If my whisper says, don't go to that networking event, how I know if that's my soul protecting me from a genuinely bad environment or just my generalized social anxiety looking for an excuse to stay on the couch?
It's a very common confusion, but the framework provides a very clear physiological lie detector test for this. Because my meditation is inherently body-centered, you don't look to your thoughts for confirmation, you look to your tissues.
Your physical tissues.
Yes, the biological marker of the soul's truth, even if that truth is terrifying or requires immense difficult action, is physical expansion,
Expansion. Meaning what, biologically?
meaning a shift toward the parasympathetic nervous system.
Yeah.
When the intuitive truth is acknowledged, even a difficult one, the body registers congruence. You will feel a relaxing of the vagus nerve.
Oh, wow.
Your stomach will unclench, your diaphragm will drop, allowing your breathing to deepen and stabilize. There is a distinct sensation of internal spaciousness and grounding.
Whereas the physical footprint of the ego's fear.
Is contraction. It triggers the sympathetic nervous system, muscle constriction, a sudden shallowness in the breath, a tightening in the chest or throat, a sudden spike in heart rate without physical exertion.
You can literally feel it.
You can. The practitioner is trained to literally ask the physical organism, does this decision expand me or does it shrink me? The body cannot lie. The mind can construct 1,000 brilliant rationalizations for a bad decision, but the digestive tract and the respiratory system will immediately signal the dissonance.
So this somatic diagnostic tool gives you access to your authentic truth. You ask the question, you bypass the echo of the ego, and you feel the expansive physical resonance of the whisper.
That's the method.
But recognizing the truth is really only the first step, isn't it? What happens to the human organism when you actually have the audacity to act on it?
Well, this is where Srivatsa's work suggests that free will isn't just a philosophical concept. It's a biological imperative for healing.
To truly grasp the gravity of this, we have to look at the historical and legal debates surrounding determinism versus free will, right?
We do. In modern materialistic science, there is a strong camp arguing for physical determinism, the concept of causal closure.
Which means what exactly?
It's the argument that human beings are essentially hyper-complex biological robots. Every choice you think you're making is actually just the inevitable mathematical result of your genetics, your past experiences, and external environmental stimuli.
So in this view, free will is basically an illusion generated by the brain to make sense of the actions it was always going to take anyway. It's an incredibly bleak view of humanity, honestly. It suggests that all our agonizing over moral choices or life directions is just theatrical dressing on a script that's already been written. But it's also a view that completely contradicts how we actually structure reality.
Precisely. The materials highlight that our entire global infrastructure, particularly the civil and criminal justice systems, utterly collapses without the presumption of free will.
Because you cannot hold a person legally or morally culpable for an action if they were biologically mandated to perform it.
Exactly. But where this tension becomes incredibly acute is within the medical and societal law of the land. Take, for example, the legal precedents discussed in our sources, like the Bolam test and the application of NICE guidelines.
This is a vital connection. Let's explore how these medical frameworks actually operate in the real world, because it perfectly illustrates the authority trap in action.
Right. So the NICE guidelines, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, provide evidence-based protocols for how doctors should treat specific conditions.
And historically, the Bolam test in English tort law established that a doctor is not negligent if they act in accordance with a practice accepted as proper by a responsible body of medical professionals.
On the surface, these are excellent rational systems designed to ensure safety and standardization.
But the dark side of this standardization is extreme rigidity. The legal sources point out that these guidelines are increasingly treated not as helpful maps, but as mandatory, inflexible laws within the courtroom.
Yes. If a physician decides to depart from the standard NICE Acts guideline because their intuition and observation of a specific patient suggest a different path, they expose themselves to massive legal liability.
Which creates a system governed by defensive medicine.
Exactly. Doctors are vastly overworked, they're operating under the constant threat of litigation, and so they are forced to adhere strictly to the protocol, regardless of the individual nuances of the human sitting in front of them.
And the patient, conditioned by the authority trap, is intimidated by the clinical environment and trained to completely submit to the expert's protocol. The system is essentially designed to override the patient's intuition, their somatic truth, in favor of the codified law.
And Srivatsa's text has a brilliant summary of how to navigate this. It says, a good doctor listens to the patient's experience. A wise patient uses medical guidance as information, not as an order.
Maya meditation radically asserts that free will is not only real, but that exercising it is the fundamental catalyst for biological survival, which leads us to one of the most astonishing physiological insights in the entire stack of sources.
Yes, the literal cellular healing power of the word NO.
The power of no. It is a profound reframing of patient autonomy.
The text argues that the act of saying NO without guilt of rejecting a protocol or relationship or an expectation that your body identifies as incongruent, even if a towering authority figure is demanding it, is the initiating spark for profound physiological healing.
Let's explain the exact biology of that. How does a linguistic refusal translate into a drop in inflammation or the stabilization of an illness?
It follows a very specific sequential pathway in the nervous system. The formula begins with the exercise of free will.
Mm.
When an individual stops deferring to external authority and makes a choice rooted in their own intuitive whisper, they generate a profound psychological state of autonomy.
They move from being a passive subject
Yeah.
to being the active sovereign of their own life.
Exactly. And when the brain registers that shift, when the internal narrative changes from I am trapped and must obey to I am in control of my boundaries, it radically alters its chemical output.
The amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, downregulates, right?
Yes, it downregulates.
Yeah.
The constant drip of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline is halted. This creates a physiological state of absolute safety.
And it's only in that state of perceived safety that the body can actually dedicate resources to repair itself.
Precisely. You enter the phase of nervous system repair. The parasympathetic nervous system fully engages. What the text calls the spiritual immune system is activated.
What does that look like on a cellular level?
On a cellular level, blood pressure normalizes, chronic muscle tension designed for fight or flight releases, and the digestive and endocrine systems, which are basically suppressed during chronic stress, come back online.
Wow. The source material boldly argues that the pure, sovereign act of saying NO from a place of aligned truth has initiated the healing of more chronic ailments than any pharmaceutical intervention.
It completely revolutionizes how we view self-respect. We are often taught that prioritizing our own boundaries over the demands of others is selfish or uncooperative.
Right, like we're being difficult.
But this framework argues that self-respect is a biological imperative. The human soul, and by extension the human nervous system, was never designed to operate in a state of permanent submission.
Submission breeds inflammation. Autonomy breeds vitality.
And this autonomy-first framework also fundamentally disrupts how we traditionally approach emotional healing, particularly the treatment of trauma.
This is a huge paradigm shift because traditional talk therapy, as beneficial as it can be for cognitive understanding, often relies heavily on narrative repetition. You go into an office and you recount the details of the traumatic event again and again, trying to analyze it from different angles.
But from a somatic perspective, the text argues that constantly retelling the story of the trauma is actually just rehearsing it.
Rehearsing it, because the primitive parts of the brain and the nervous system do not easily distinguish between the original occurrence of a traumatic event and the vivid memory of it.
Exactly. So every time you mentally force yourself back into the narrative, your brain dumps the exact same stress chemicals into your bloodstream. You are re-traumatizing your own tissues under the guise of trying to heal them.
You basically keep the nervous system locked in a perpetual state of fear.
Therefore, Maya meditation approaches trauma not through cognitive analysis, but through somatic release. It focuses on acknowledging the presence of the pain without requiring you to inhabit the story.
You don't need to dissect every detail of the betrayal or the accident.
No, you simply observe that a painful event occurred and that your physical organism is currently holding the kinetic energy of that event.
It's moving from, why did this happen to me, to, where is this living in my body? You locate the stored energy, the chronic tightness in the jaw, the persistent ache in the chest, and you apply that radical, still observation.
You allow the physical sensation to move and dissipate without attaching a narrative to it. It's about feeling it to free it rather than thinking about it to fix it.
It is the ultimate expression of internal trust. You trust the body's innate intelligence to process the energy without needing the rational mind to control or micromanage the healing.
That's beautifully put.
Okay, so if we zoom out from the individual nervous system, when we reclaim our free will, and we stop allowing the fear-based law of the land to dictate our internal state, we inherently begin to operate on a different frequency. We start aligning with what the sources call the laws of the universe.
Which brings us to a massive systemic question. What exactly are these universal laws, and how do they function?
Right. If we cross-reference the materials from the Foundation for Consciousness Development and the expansive literature on the 12 universal laws, we encounter a paradigm of reality that is vastly different from human legislation.
Very different. Human rules are localized, temporary, and subject to constant revision based on political whim. Universal laws are described as absolute, immutable physics of consciousness.
They are mathematically exact. They apply to a star collapsing in a distant galaxy exactly the same way they apply to a human heart navigating grief. You cannot negotiate with them, you cannot bribe them, and you cannot repeal them.
And the text from the Foundation draws a really brilliant practical distinction regarding how human beings interact with these massive laws. It boils down to the conflict between two very simple phrases: I want versus I need.
It is a profound psychological pivot. When we are operating from the ego, locked in the authority trap, our default language is always I want. I want more money. I want a promotion. I want my partner to change their behavior. I want the political landscape to align with my views.
And the text makes a stark claim here. Operating from what we want is the primary generator of human suffering.
Why is that?
Because the ego's want is almost always demanding an outcome that exists outside the current physics of the universal law. It is demanding that reality bend to its preferences.
So you are basically standing in the rain, screaming at the sky that you wanted to be sunny, and suffering because you were getting wet.
Exactly. But when we operate from the soul, from a place of intuitive wisdom, the language shifts to I need. And the most radical formulation of this in the text is the realization I need everything I currently have.
Which is incredibly challenging for the rational mind to accept. It sounds like passive resignation.
But it's not. It is the deep spiritual recognition that whatever circumstances you are currently facing, the difficult boss, the health challenge, the financial strain, are exactly the pedagogical tools required for the evolution of your consciousness in this exact moment.
Aligning with that realization immediately stops the internal war and brings you into a state of flow with the law.
Yes.
Let's map out the architecture of these laws, because the Foundation categorizes them into a very specific hierarchy. At the apex, you have the superior laws, which govern the creation and the massive administration of the cosmos. These are the laws of love, manifestation, polarity, and evolution.
And then, operating beneath them, governing the dense, often difficult human experience, is the inferior triangle, sometimes cheerfully referred to as the triangle of hell, which consists of the laws of correspondence, harmony, and nature.
The triangle of hell. Lovely. Let's unpack the mechanics of a few of these, starting with polarity.
Okay, so the law of polarity dictates that everything in the universe has an opposite, and that these opposites are actually just varying degrees of the same exact thing. Heat and cold are not separate phenomena, they are simply different markers on the same spectrum of thermal energy.
And applied to consciousness, it means that you cannot fundamentally comprehend joy without the contrasting context of sorrow.
Right. The ego tries to permanently sever the good pole from the bad pole, trying to live entirely in comfort. But the law states that the tension between the two is what generates reality itself.
Which leads directly into the law of evolution. The text describes evolution almost as an anti-law, doesn't it? Because its entire purpose is to relentlessly force the development of consciousness.
And the mechanism it uses to do that is friction. It deliberately creates disequilibrium.
This is where people struggle, because from a human perspective, the law of evolution looks like sheer cruelty. It looks like random chaos, systemic pain, and social ills. We see conflict, and we think the universe is broken.
But from the perspective of the universal physics, it is a perfect, ruthless teaching mechanism. A muscle only grows when it is subjected to the micro-tiers of resistance training. Human consciousness only expands when it is faced with circumstances that are so untenable, so painful, that the old ways of thinking are forced to collapse.
We only recognize the necessity of balance because we are forced to endure the agonizing consequences of imbalance.
Exactly. The friction isn't a mistake. It is the engine of growth.
It's the friction that creates the spark. And then, operating in that lower triangle of human experience, we have the law of correspondence. If the law of evolution is the engine of friction, the law of correspondence might be the hardest pill for the human ego to swallow.
It definitely is. The law of correspondence mathematically dictates that a place exists for everything, and everything is exactly in its place. The macrocosm is reflected in the microcosm. It means that absolutely nothing happens to anyone that isn't precisely meant for them.
The environment you find yourself in corresponds exactly to the internal lessons you need to learn.
Yeah.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here. If we accept the law of correspondence, that everything is exactly as it should be and I'm exactly where I need to be, how does that not lead directly to total moral apathy?
That is the most common critique.
Because if a systemic injustice exists, and I say, well, it's just the law of correspondence teaching everyone a lesson, why would I ever fight to cure a disease or work to dismantle an oppressive regime? Doesn't this just breed a fatalistic shrug?
It's a vital question.
Yeah.
But the nuance lies in the difference between apathy and aligned action. Accepting the law of correspondence does not mean you don't take action. It means you stop taking reactive, ego-driven action against the reality of the present moment.
Can you give an example?
If you are diagnosed with an illness, the ego immediately fights the reality. This is unfair. This shouldn't be happening. I am a victim. That resistance drains your energy. Wisdom says, this illness is here. It corresponds to my current reality. I accept its presence.
And from that place of calm acceptance.
Your intuition can clearly guide you to the specific medical or holistic actions required to heal. You still take the medicine, but you stop violently fighting the fact that you need the medicine.
Ah, I see. It's about where the energy is directed. If you are fighting the reality of the lesson, you generate massive psychological blockages.
Exactly.
The text notes that we can actually verify this law in our own lives by looking at the things we endlessly struggle for but cannot achieve. If we forcefully insist on an outcome that isn't meant for us, like trying to force a broken relationship to work, or clawing our way into a career path that our soul rejects, we are met with constant, exhausting resistance.
It is exactly like trying to swim upstream against a raging river. Human laws, societal expectations, and our own terrified egos might put up massive neon signs on the riverbank saying, swim this way. Fight the current. If you just paddle harder, you'll reach success.
But the universal law is the river itself. It has its own immense, immutable momentum.
And the intuitive whisper, accessed through my meditation, is the quiet voice telling you to stop fighting, turn around, and simply float. The river knows exactly where it's going.
True wisdom is surrendering the exhausting fight against the natural correspondence of the universe. It is accepting the reality of your current coordinates so that you can actually fulfill your mission.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of all these concepts. We've thoroughly explored the mechanics on an individual level. We see how tuning into the whisper heals the nervous system, restores autonomy, and aligns a person with universal flow.
But what happens if this isn't just an isolated practice? What happens to the macroscopic architecture of human society if every individual soul begins to operate from this paradigm?
This is where the source material transitions from personal healing to a breathtaking vision for global transformation. Because when an individual genuinely connects to their soul through these practices, a radical shift in their fundamental identity occurs.
As we discussed, they no longer identify as a collection of societal labels attached to a biological machine. They recognize themselves as eternal consciousness temporarily experiencing a physical form.
And the implications of that realization are socially explosive. Because eternal consciousness is formless, it is completely immune to the arbitrary categories the ego uses to establish value.
Right. The soul does not care about race. It does not care about religious affiliation. It doesn't care about the balance of your bank account. And it certainly doesn't care about human-made hierarchies of status.
And the moment that realization solidifies within a population, the entire illusion of superiority evaporates. If you fundamentally recognize that you are a manifestation of eternal consciousness, and you recognize that the person standing across from you is an exact equal manifestation of that same consciousness, how can you possibly subjugate them?
You cannot. It becomes psychologically and energetically impossible. This paradigm completely dismantles the hierarchies of disparity that human civilizations have relied upon for millennia.
It even challenges the historical, often corrupted applications of concepts like dharma, which in certain ancient contexts were weaponized to justify rigid caste systems and embedded social inequality. True alignment with universal law recognizes no inherent superiority of one soul over another.
Because every soul must think and act in a way that acknowledges there are no disparities to make one soul better than another. And dismantling that hierarchy naturally leads to the eradication of dependency. Our sources are unflinchingly blunt about this mechanism. Fear is the engine of dependency, and dependency is the most profitable industry on Earth.
It is the business model of modern civilization. The pharmaceutical and medical industries, in many aspects, profit immensely from a population terrified of physical mortality and dependent on external cures.
The 24-hour news media ecosystem generates billions of dollars by keeping the public in a state of hypervigilant fear regarding crime, economic collapse, or political disaster.
And authoritarian political systems maintain their grip on power by promising protection from a constantly shifting, terrifying other.
But a human being who is deeply connected to their intuitive whisper, whose nervous system is anchored in parasympathetic safety, cannot be controlled by those fear narratives. They possess absolute sovereignty.
They trust their internal data processing, their somatic truth, more than they trust the loudest, most threatening external authority. They will simply refuse to surrender their free will in exchange for a false promise of safety.
It is the triumph of sovereignty over submission. But crucially, this sovereignty is not aggressive. A soul anchored in truth has absolutely no desire to conquer or manipulate the free will of anyone else.
Right. The ego seeks to control others to feel safe. The soul is already inherently safe.
So if we synthesize this to its ultimate logical conclusion, we arrive at the mechanics of a world without war. Think about the massive, complex machinery required to sustain an armed conflict between nations. Wars do not happen spontaneously.
They require mass, unthinking obedience. They require millions of citizens to completely override their internal moral intuition and blindly follow the law of the land as dictated by a king, a president, or a general.
Wars require the systematic cultivation of a deep-seated fear of the other, and they rely entirely on the ego's insatiable desire to conquer, possess, and control resources.
But if every human being masters the art of listening to their intuition, if everyone is aligned with the law of the universe rather than the fear of scarcity and operates from the expansive truth of their physical body, the entire machinery of war grinds to an absolute halt.
Because a society comprised of sovereign, intuitively aligned individuals cannot be propagandized into mass animosity. You cannot draft a soul that refuses to violate its own truth. The generals could declare a war, and the individuals would simply say NO, activating their autonomy and refusing to participate in the destruction of an equal consciousness.
It represents an evolutionary leap for our species. It is a fundamental shift from humanity reacting to life out of terror to humanity commanding life through presence and alignment.
And the texts emphatically suggest that this massive societal transformation does not require decades of complex political reform. It begins intimately, with how we raise the next generation.
Yes, the practical application for children in the book is so beautiful. It offers incredibly simple ways to keep a child connected to their innate intuition before the authority trap of the adult world trains it out of them.
Instead of enforcing blind obedience, you teach discernment, like the tummy check game.
It's a perfect somatic tool.
Yeah.
Think about how often a child expresses a feeling, fear, discomfort, sadness, and the adult reflexively says, "Stop crying, you're fine, there's nothing to be afraid of."
That immediately trains the child that their internal physical sensation is incorrect, and that the external authority figure knows their reality better than they do.
You are literally building the authority trap in their neural pathways.
Exactly. Instead, the framework suggests validating their truth. When they are unsure or upset, you ask them to place a hand on their stomach. You ask, "What does your tummy feel right now? Is it tight? Is it open?" You teach them to interpret the whispers of their own nervous system.
By doing that, you are raising a generation that is biologically immune to manipulation. You raise human beings who know, from a cellular level, that their truth is sacred and profoundly connected to universal harmony.
They grow into adults who collaborate as equal partners in their healthcare, who construct relationships based on authentic resonance rather than performative obligation, and who demand structures of governance that align with reality rather than fear.
It is an incredibly powerful, deeply optimistic vision of what humanity is capable of when we clear the interference.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and quickly synthesize the massive journey we've just taken. We started in the murky, anxious waters of our modern baseline, recognizing how profoundly disconnected we are, trapped by the illusion that blind obedience to human-made rules guarantees safety.
We then decoded the elegant mechanics of Maya meditation, the practice of radical stillness, and the crucial somatic distinction between the quiet, instantaneous truth of the soul's whisper and the loud, fearful rationalizations of the ego's echo.
We explore the biological reality of free will, detailing the exact physiological formula of how a sovereign, guilt-free NO downregulates the amygdala, creates systemic safety, and literally allows the physical body to heal.
We zoomed out to examine the architecture of the universal laws principles, like evolution and correspondence. understanding that our suffering stems from fighting the current of reality, and our power comes from aligning with exactly what we need in the present moment.
And finally, we looked at the ultimate sociological promise, a paradigm where the realization of our shared eternal consciousness completely eradicates the hierarchies of disparity. A world where sovereign individuals, anchored in their truth, render the fear-based mechanisms of war entirely obsolete.
It is a profound shift in orientation, asking us to move our ultimate allegiance from the flawed law of the land to the immutable law of the universe. And it leaves every single practitioner with a critical, ongoing choice in their daily lives.
I absolutely love this framework. To you listening right now, here is a final thought to mull over as you step back into the complexity of your day. The next time you find yourself standing at a major crossroad, whether it's a medical decision, a career pivot, or a relationship boundary, take a moment of deliberate stillness.
Notice what the loudest, most demanding rule in your society is ordering you to do. Notice what the authority trap is threatening you with.
And then place your hand on your heart. Drop your awareness into your body and ask your tissues what they truly need. If the quiet, expansive whisper of your soul directly contradicts the loudest law of the land, wait, let me rephrase that. If the quiet, expansive whisper of your soul directly contradicts the loudest law of the land, which one will you have the courage to follow?
Because the moment you choose the whisper, the diagnostic landscape of your life ceases to be a rigid, jagged, white line. It becomes a living, breathing, profoundly powerful conversation with the universe itself.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible deep dive. Trust your whisper, stay curious, and we'll see you next time.